So, chapter 21. Eleanor. The passing of time had delivered an unexpected friendship between me and Eleanor, the elderly lady who had stayed with us in our first and second years. But it also took things away. There were a number of people leaving Portugal for economic reasons, but from mine and Stephen's perspective, and although we did our best not to associate with them, there appeared at least as many British arrivals as Portuguese departures from around the towns and villages where we lived. The sunny, settled climate had a little to do with the country's allure, even though in the mountainous villages, living in houses built for the heat rather than the cold, the winters were generally hard. Yet even in winter time, when the sun shone on the land and made frosty fields glisten, or turned the seats outside cafes inviting once more, souls and bones were soon warmed. A year or so after Steve and I had moved to Potato, another English face became a regular sight, and that was of Eleanor. Once again, the old tenet of strangers from England being indeed strange was demonstrated, and although the oddities of the lady were not immediately obvious, they began showing themselves within a short time. An offer on Eleanor's Kent bungalow had been accepted in summer, as had been the case for Stephen and me when we moved from our London flat. And the parallel with her move unfortunately continued as time ticked on and the migration from the UK eventually happened with Winter assuming the role of host as the welcome party. With a further wait for the furniture to arrive and things to arrange, such as a heating system for the new house, which would not require the old lady to be lighting, feeding and cleaning a wood-burning stove, Stephen insisted that Eleanor stay with me and him until things had settled down, at least a little. Stephen was a man who had made friends and a family that loved him. Oh, I'm reading that bit again. Stephen was a man who had many friends and a family that loved him. Although not consciously, he had for most of his life kept all but a few people at arm's length. His musical passion and talent for the specialised instrument he favoured being one of the obstacles in the way of him building closer ties with many who were not on the same circuit. But in Eleanor, he and she had found someone they clicked with. The retired lady was in her 60s when she started having lessons with Stephen. The 20-something professor of music could not contain his enthusiasm for the pieces he was able to produce for his own enjoyment, and it was this, alongside an overwhelming admiration for her tutor's talent, which, rather than her own passion, developed Eleanor's love of the instrument and connected the two souls in a way that transcended their many differences. By the time Stephen had left England, there was a friendship and trust between the middle-aged man and the elderly lady that had built over the previous 2 decades. If Stephen had a patron, then it was Eleanor, and if Eleanor, who had no children of her own, thought of anyone as a son, then it was Stephen. The first time Eleanor had visited Portugal, she was in her mid-70s. The lady, who was born between the 2 world wars, had always needed a guide, and being influenced by a period when the man of the house was also the master, meant that she had transferred her loyalties and a great deal of her independence from a father she idolised to a couple of husbands, not at the same time, you understand. When Eleanor had become widowed, she turned increasingly towards Stephen as a replacement for the male figure in her life. And it was in this context, and unbeknown to Stephen at that time, that she had begun giving the idea of a move to Portugal careful consideration. The decision was anything but snap, and followed early autumn and then midwinter visits to the village of Potato. Although without doubt Stephen became the driving force behind his friend's eventual immigration to Portugal, the move occurred 3 years after the idea had first been aired, and it was Eleanor who meticulously checked and rechecked every possible practical detail about her life away from the UK, examining in great detail her rights as a British citizen living abroad. In theory, all the necessary precautions and preparations for the great change in her life had been done. But time revealed Eleanor not to be the person she herself believed she was. Bright, bold colours that she had used to paint her self-portrait were mistaken by herself and her audience as reflecting an audacious personality, full of vigour, excitement and daring. In reality, the sharp lines and lack of pastels were an indication of a personality that needed rules to be fast and hard, arguments to be clean-cut, and directions clearly marked. So despite Eleanor's connection with Portugal through Stephen and me, which had been established a few years before she arrived here to live, realization dawned on all three of us that the lady who had enjoyed the country rambles, who was independent, confident, and had shown competency of the language, was not the person who became our neighbour. Paradoxically, during the following months that the then septuagenarian appeared to find her feet, she managed to adapt quickly. The house she had bought was a large property that nonetheless suited her needs, and although the swimming pool was unlikely to be used a great deal, and the large plot of land a drawback rather than an asset for Eleanor, she did enjoy the space the grassy slopes provided and the feeling of being close to nature that the forested parts of her land afforded her. However, the different reality to the one Eleanor, Stephen and me had believed in made itself apparent before too long, as the walks that the old lady had accompanied us on with our dog Melina, while she'd holidayed here, were greatly reduced once she became a permanent resident. The things that stopped Eleanor having the stroll, making that cake, popping to the baker's or pottering around on her land, were that she never seemed to have the exact clothing, ingredients, tins, weather conditions, etc. Whatever her friends, Stephen and I, did to rectify the deficiencies, they never seemed to be good enough. Yet, despite this, there was one substantial hike within the first year of her arrival, and it showed that the lady's heart, if not her ability to prioritise, was in the right place. The money-raising event had been organised by the local leisure association. Representing a small group of neighbouring villages, the idea was to help a couple whose house had suffered considerable fire damage. Accompanied by her two friends and Melina during the hike, Eleanor took scrambling across makeshift bridges, navigating a way along steep, craggy rocks and up past waterfalls in her stride. And us three friends laughed at each other and ourselves whilst we slipped and crawled our way through the course. At the end of the day, when we appeared back at base almost 3 hours after everyone else, we were rewarded with a hero's welcome and ushered to a table where chairs were hurriedly taken over, along with food and a bottle of wine. Stephen's pride at his friend's achievement was evident as he drew attention to the muddy seat of Eleanor's trousers, and everyone was amazed that the late 70-year-old had completed the course. Other contradictions were revealed as the lady's language learning, which had started off quite impressively, reached an early peak. During that first year of me guiding her through grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and listening, she surprised me by being adept at the exercises, her logical thinking finding little difficulty with the concept of words having a gender which affected the way they associated with other words. Yet a mind that easily grasped the black and white of grammar rules could not cope with the variables of everyday interactive conversation, and all the practice that was carried out at home never really found itself a use outside, where the phrases Eleanor had learnt were never exactly reproduced. Nevertheless, the little Englishwoman seemed unfazed by the language barrier, and in those first months, she and me took the weekly bus into town, chatting with the other passengers, all of them in their 70s and 80s. Once we had reached Miranda de Cordoval, Eleanor would stroll around the little supermarket or the market square while I went to the library. And on one of those occasions, Eleanor even had a coffee by herself, sitting there outside a cafe in April sunshine. However, the alfresco cafe was a rare occasion that never got repeated because it wasn't quite as I remembered it from when I sat there with you and Stephen, Eleanor later told us. So although the flaking of the paint was not immediate, when the peeling of the old image was complete, the clearer picture presented challenges to the three of us. Eleanor had liked me from the first time we had met. She saw how happy I made Stephen, and it was only a matter of time until a friendship had developed between herself and me. Yet, as with all relationships, where there were times of laughter and there were times of tears.